So, part two. In part one, I was talking about how I had confronted this sort of left-wing censorship, and it made me super uncomfortable because that's not what I thought liberalism was. I guess maybe I was naive in that I thought it meant what that was, that it was literally liberal, that people could just be free to do whatever, but apparently I was completely wrong about that. So I was subscribed to all of these left-wing blogs like salon.com and slate.com and Jezebel and all of those things. And around this time, not all of the articles, but a ton of them were about race. And let me just give you an example. Here's an example of a headline. Diversity on TV is scary, reports white woman. And I don't know if I missed that part of college or something, but I didn't understand this identity politics, and I had heard of like white privilege and these things. I never took it seriously, really. I thought it was weird, but I didn't really think about it too much. But that kind of thing started being bigger and bigger to the point where I couldn't really ignore it anymore. Another article on Jezebel, here's another example of something that is crazy. North Carolina frat suspended for notebook of rape and lynching jokes. See, why is that an article? Why are you, it's a fraternity. Of course, they're a bunch of jocks, and it's a joke. When did people start getting suspended and arrested for jokes or for things that they were saying? Or when did all of these things, weird consequences start happening to people just for making jokes or saying something or having the wrong opinion? Another thing, I read this article, and a lot of people in the Reactionary have written about this. It's called Why I Can't Stop Reading Mormon Housewife Blogs, and it's on salon.com. And the sub-headline is, I'm a young feminist atheist who can't bake a cupcake. Why am I addicted to the shiny, happy lives of these women? Here's part of the article. It says, the focus on the positive is especially alluring when your own life seems anything but easy. As my friend G says of her fascination with Mormon lifestyle blogs, I'm just jealous. I want to arrange flowers all day too. She doesn't really. She's just tired from long days spent in the lab, from a decade of living in a tiny apartment because she's too poor from student loans to buy a house, from constant negotiations about breadwinning status with her artist husband. It's not that she or I want to quit our jobs to break brownies or sew kitty Halloween costumes. It's just that, for G, Mormon blogs are an escapist fantasy, a way to imagine a sweeter, simpler life. The next part, she says, of course, the larger question is, are these women's lives really as sweet and simple as they appear? Blogs have always been a way to mediate and prettify your own life. You'd be a fool to compare your real self to someone else's carefully arranged surface self. And Mormons are particularly famous for their put-on-a-happy-face attitude. The church teaches that the gospel is the only authentic path to true happiness. So if you're a faithful follower, you better be happy, right? So I think this woman is trying really, really hard to justify her decisions, even though she can see that these other women who are doing this sort of traditional feminine thing are probably happy. She doesn't want to admit that they are because that would mean that what she has been told and her whole life philosophy is maybe not the best decision. But anyway, I read that article, and there's so much cognitive dissonance there, and I kept thinking about that for a while. Another thing that happened was I met some girls who were really into feminism, but when I started talking to them about it, this one girl said to me, yeah, I only read feminists of color, with the things that they write. And I just thought that was weird. You're a white person. Why do you think you are going to relate so much more to women of color, as you put it? I just thought that was weird. I thought, why can't you get the perspective of more than one person? It was just stuff like that. It was bizarre. It's like this ethnomasochism. It was very weird. This girl was also always complaining about her job. She was claiming that her boss was sexist and racist, and every job she'd ever had, they were like this, and she was just had this horrible, horrible victim mentality. And it really turned me off, and I was like, if this is what feminism is about, is complaining about how you're a victim of the world and the patriarchy and everyone is sexist and racist, I don't know if I want to be a part of that. So I think I was searching, and I probably Googled like dissonant feminist or something. Because I still really wanted, I'd never even fathomed that I wouldn't call myself feminist at this point. So I thought maybe there's another type of feminism, because there's all the different streams, so maybe there's another type. And I discovered Camille Paglia, she talks a lot about how a lot of feminists see themselves as victims and how that's not really a productive way to view things. And that was a really big awakening for me too, when she was talking about this way of victim mentality, because I sort of had attributed, whenever a guy would slight me or say something weird, I would attribute that to some sort of casual misogyny, and that was a really common thing. But it's kind of just an excuse. I think it's better to just see people as people instead of attributing everything to these power relationships that may or may not exist. And there's another good example of this, an article on Salon. In the spirit of helpful correction, Tucker Carlson and the everyday sexism of policing women's tone. And it's just these nitpicky little things that you don't know if a guy is talking to you in a certain way because you're a woman. He might just be an asshole, and he might just talk to everyone that way. And it's just crazy to view everything in that way. So it was just kind of one thing after another. I started having these realizations. And I bought Camille Paglia's book, Sexual Personae. I started reading it, and as soon as I did, it had this huge impact on me. Not just feminism, just my entire worldview was basically turned upside down. Let me just read a passage from this. This was the part that really sort of made me change my view on everything. Society is not the criminal, but the force which keeps crime in check. When social controls weaken, man's innate cruelty bursts forth. The rapist is created not by bad social influences, but by a failure of social conditioning. Feminists, seeking to drive power relations out of sex, have set themselves against nature. Sex is power. Identity is power. In Western culture, there are no exploitative relationships. Everyone is killed in order to live. Modern liberalism suffers unresolved contradictions. It exalts individualism and freedom, and on its radical wing condemns social orders as oppressive. On the other hand, it expects government to provide materially for all, a feat manageable only by an expansion of authority and a swollen bureaucracy. In other words, liberalism defines government as tyrant father, but demands it behaves as nurturant mother. Feminism has inherited these contradictions. It sees every hierarchy as repressive, a social fiction. Every negative about woman is a male lie designed to keep her in place. Feminism has exceeded its proper mission of seeking political equality for women, and has ended by rejecting contingency, that is, human limitation by nature or fate. Sexual freedom, sexual liberation, a modern delusion. We are hierarchical animals. Sweep one hierarchy away and another will take its place, perhaps less palatable than the first. There are hierarchies in nature and alternative hierarchies in society. So you can imagine reading that. I believed in equality, and in 1 minute, I kind of realized that it's an impossibility. And I kind of went into shock, actually, after I read like the first 10 pages of this book, because everything I had believed in my whole life, equality of the sexes, equality for everyone, I realized that it couldn't exist. Another part of this book that made me think a lot about race, even though she doesn't mention it. Listen to this. Rousseau rejects original sin, Christianity's pessimistic view of man born unclean, with a propensity for evil. Rousseau's idea, derived from Locke, of man's innate goodness led to social environmentalism, now the dominant ethic of American human services, penal codes, and behaviorist therapies. It assumes that aggression, violence, and crime come from social deprivation, a poor neighborhood, a bad home. Thus, feminism blames rape on pornography, and by a smug circularity of reasoning, interprets outbreaks of sadism as a backlash to itself. But rape and sadism have been evident throughout history, and at some moment in all cultures. So even though she doesn't mention race, I think the implications of that statement, that this aggression and violence doesn't come from, oh, they grew up so poor or whatever. It comes from their very nature. And, I mean, we all know who commits the most crimes and who's the most violent. So I immediately thought of race. I had read this book in college. It's called Guns, Germs, and Steel. Maybe you've heard of it. But basically this book is a big pile of propaganda. I was assigned this book in college, by the way, for a class. Let's see. Basically, this book is an attempt by this guy, Jared Diamond, to explain why Europeans lived in civilization, why Africans didn't, why Australian Aboriginal people were in the Stone Age while white Europeans were not, basically. He says that it's not due to racism, or it has nothing to do with intelligence, and it's all because they had access to guns, germs, and steel, basically. But he says this. My perspective on this controversy comes from 33 years of working with New Guineans in their own intact societies. From the very beginning of my work with New Guineans, they impressed me as being, on the average, more intelligent, more alert, more expressive, and more interested in things and people around them than the average European or American is. At some tasks that one might reasonably suppose to reflect aspects of brain function, such as the ability to form a mental map of unfamiliar surroundings, they appear considerably more adept than Westerners. Of course, New Guineans tend to perform poorly at tasks that Westerners have been trained to perform since childhood, and that New Guineans have not. Hence, when unschooled New Guineans from remote villages visit towns, they look stupid to Westerners. Conversely, I am constantly aware of how stupid I look to New Guineans when I'm with them in the jungle, displaying my incompetence at simple tasks at which New Guineans have been trained since childhood, and I have not. Intelligent people are likelier than less intelligent ones to escape those causes of high mortality in traditional New Guinea societies. Basically, he is running in circles around himself trying to claim that New Guinean people are smarter than Europeans. Here's what else he says. Besides this genetic reason, there's also a second reason why New Guineans may have come to be smarter than Westerners. So you see, he's already contradicting himself. He's saying that civilization has nothing to do with this, but actually New Guineans are smarter than you. And I don't remember really questioning it that much when I was assigned this for school, which is insane because it's not true. And as soon as I read what Camille Paglia said about how the uncivilized behavior comes from lack of civilization, I knew that this was wrong. So I looked up reviews on Amazon to see if anyone else had come to the same conclusion as me. This is what I found. A guy reviewing the book. Imagine my surprise when I found out that this book, which I've been looking forward to reading for so long, isn't a science book at all. It's more of a convoluted political treatise in which the author uses every trick in the book to support his beliefs. He makes completely false statements, omits even the most obvious arguments refuting his position, passes off his poorly formed opinions as fact, and uses some of the most tortured logic I've ever had the misfortune to read. But you're saying the same thing I did when I read the few negative reviews of Guns, Germs, and Steel. Who is this guy to criticize Jared Diamond? So let me give you some concrete examples of what I mean. I think my favorite statement in this book, because the author managed to achieve absurdity on so many different levels with it, is that kids today are getting dumber because they watch too much TV. Let's just examine that for a moment. First, the fundamental assumption is flat wrong. Average performances on IQ tests, the best measure at this point, have been rising since the test was first administered. If you don't believe me, look it up. It's called the Flynn effect. Now, normally a statement this odd would have sent me scrambling to the footnotes, but there are none, undoubtedly because they would interfere with Diamond's ability to just make stuff up. Second, because we have the historical test numbers and we know the dates for the invention and proliferation of television, we can see that there is no correlation with IQ. And finally, okay, I admit to being a bit snarky here, they made a TV show out of this book. Why do I think Diamond would accept that particular program from his hypothesis? We then have his now vaguely infamous and typically unsupported idea that the people of New Guinea are smarter than Europeans because they live in a more violent and dangerous society which selects for intelligence, as opposed to European society which tended to select for disease resistance. While I recognize that this kind of reverse racism is the holy grail of the politically correct scientist, there is a reason why thinkers much more weighty than Diamond won't touch this subject with a 10-foot pole. If we accept Diamond's theory, how long until someone points out that survival in dangerous, violent societies probably select physically strong, violent people over intelligent ones? Think of it this way. If you had to hire someone to carry your life savings across Somalia on foot, would you choose A, the captain of your high school chess club, or B, a former Navy SEAL in prison for beating a guy to death with a tire iron? So now we're suddenly suggesting that certain races are more prone to violence than others. Oops. So imagine reading that, and at first I was really mad. Why had I been assigned this book in an institution of higher learning this was a science class, and the book is completely false. And I know this would never work in a million years, but can I sue the school for forcing me to read something that's blatantly untrue? And what about my professor? He's a smart guy. I wonder if he really believes this, or if he's just going along with it. Why are they teaching these students in school these obviously false things? It really bummed me out.